I caught up with Brad the following Monday at his next appointment. I was anxious to hear how things had gone for him. Well, he answered, okay, I guess. I first asked him about his intentional selfie, and this was his response. I felt like a complete idiot. And I hope to God I never lose my phone. Someone will think I'm a freak. I chuckled a bit. Okay, really? I laughed out loud. This is the most typical response I get. Brad had made it in his car on the way home. Well, he had stopped first, of course. He wasn't going to risk somebody walking in on him at home when he was trying to shoot his little selfie. So I asked him how many times he'd managed to watch it. He admitted he hadn't made it to 10 each day. Well, it was 10 the first day, but then he drifted a bit. He didn't actually write down the number of times he watched it, but estimated maybe 7 or 8. He would try and listen 3 times on his way to work, through the Bluetooth on his car, that was cool, and then 3 more times on the way home. And then he would try to actually watch the video during the day, and then maybe sneak in 1 more before he went to bed. I asked him how he felt about it. His answer, yeah, it's kind of weird. At first I hated the sound of my voice, and I hated my appearance. I'd be halfway through the tape and realize I was thinking mostly about how stupid my voice sounded, and then I'd have to start it over. But after the 3rd or 4th day, strangely, that calmed down a bit, and I found that I actually liked listening to myself. When I did watch the video, the same thing happened. My brain quit critiquing my appearance, and I started to actually like watching myself. I know that sounds weird, he added, almost like it was embarrassing to actually like hearing his own voice and like seeing his own image on tape. But I assured him that's not weird at all. That's just his reticular activating system in his brain doing its thing. It's the same system in the brain that's responsible for making sure that the sound of her baby crying gets mom's attention, even in a crowded airport with all of the millions of much louder sounds that are filling the air. More on the science of this later, but suffice it to say that we pay more attention to our own voice and our own image on that tape than we do to anybody else. That's a built-in system in the brain, already working, that makes full use of the cognitive selfie. And it makes sure that we pay the highest degree of attention and focus to the sound of our own voices and the sight of our own images. The only reason our brain critiques it so much at first is that it simply comes from a different perspective. We're not used to hearing or seeing ourselves from the perspective of a videotape. We hear our own voices every day, but we hear them after they've bounced off an object and made it back to our ears, not straight from a speaker. And we see our own images every day, in the mirror usually, but the video camera flips that image exactly backwards when we see it in a mirror. Since we're not perfectly symmetrical, the image is distorted a bit in the brain. Thus, both our voice and our image seem a little weird initially. Within a few tries, however, the brain consolidates these differences and erases that weird factor. From there on, we begin to actually like to hear and like to watch ourselves. It's not narcissism, not egotism. It's just our reticular activating system doing what it does best. This is what makes the intentional selfie so darn powerful. So back to Brad. He listened to his tape 3 more times on the way to the golf course and then watched it 2 more times before getting his clubs out of the trunk. As predicted, all of his friends had already begun drinking by the time Brad arrived. And as predicted, they offered him a beer as he walked up to the putting green. Brad gave them his pre-rehearsed spiel about just eating lunch, and lo and behold, nobody said a word further. This kind of surprised him. Brad actually cracked open his first beer on the way down the first fairway after teeing off at 1 and then settled into his plan. Brad's first surprise was when he observed how fast his friends were drinking. He knew they drank fast, but he never noticed just how fast. He was being offered a next beer before they even made it down the first fairway. This launched Brad right into the second part of his intention. He made the reference to not just not feeling it and wanting to take it easy. Again, his prediction was off. He got a shrug of his shoulders from his buddy, and that was about it. Brad realized in that moment that his buddies were really more concerned that Brad was drinking with them, not how much or how fast. Brad was offered a beer 2 more times prior to it hitting 2 o'clock. Wow. That was a beer every 15 minutes for his buddies. Pretty eye-opening for Brad. When 2 p.m. did roll around, Brad grabbed a beer and asked all 3 of the buddies in his foursome if they were ready. Of course they were. They all took a beer. A quick calculation in his brain yielded his buddies were on at least beer number 6 already. And so it went for the next 3 hours. Brad dutifully waited until the top of the hour and repeated his little routine. He probably wouldn't have had to make it a point to ask his buddies every time if they were ready, just to remind them that he was, in fact, drinking with them. By 3 p.m., they were pretty toasted and really not paying attention to what Brad was doing at all. Brad couldn't remember the last time he had observed a golf outing from this sober perspective. He was literally amazed at how stupid his buddies looked in their drunken state. And he remembered thinking, holy crap, that's exactly what I've always looked like. His intention to drink only 1 beer per hour went great for the first 4 beers, but then it kind of got away from him. Brad admitted that by the time 4 p.m. rolled around, the voices in his head got to him. Voices? I asked. Yeah, the ones you were telling me I would probably hear. And with that, Brad pulled out his phone. He had actually texted them to himself on the golf course. The first one surprised him. He admitted he was feeling left out. He heard himself saying, Brad, you're missing out on all the fun. And he said he felt like a little kid who was watching all of his friends eat ice cream and he couldn't have any because he was in timeout for doing something bad. Now that I say that out loud, it sounds even more pathetic, said Brad. I'm a grown-ass man. I can drink whenever I want to. And I'm not drinking to intoxication because I'm choosing to not do so. Yet I'm still enjoying a few beers on the golf course. And really, this is the first time in a long time I can truly say I was having a few beers. Even though I always say that, but it's really 20. And I'm not doing this because I kind of like having a wife and a liver. And here I am, jealous of 3 guys who are drunk and acting like complete immature assholes. And I'm feeling like a little kid in timeout who doesn't get to play with them? Holy shit, that's pathetic. And you know what's even more pathetic, Brad added? That damn thought was enough to get me to abandon my intention. I just smiled and shook my head. Isn't the brain a crazy thing? So how bad did you abandon your intention, I asked. Well, once I realized I'd messed up, I heard another distinct thought. You screwed up, Brad. You might as well go for it. And then I heard this thought. You got some catching up to do. And so I went for it. Well, what did went for it look like? Probably about 10 beers before it was said and done. So tell me the rest of the story. Well, Brad continued, by then my buddies were pretty trashed. We got back to the clubhouse, got some food, and sat around drinking until probably about 9 o'clock. At that point, they were slowing down a bit, so my estimate is that we had maybe 4 rounds before they all left. That would make it about 10 beers for me, but holy crap, they had to have each had at least 30. Then what happened? Well, Brad got a bit of a smile on his face. I went to my car, sat down in the driver's seat, and reached for this. And he held up his handheld breathalyzer. It had been at least a half hour since I last drank, so I blew. And guess what? 0.10, over the legal limit. So I waited until all of my buddies had driven out of the parking lot, and I walked back inside and asked if I could leave my car there overnight. And then I called a cab. That was definitely a first. I figured I could wait until I was down under the .08, but then I thought about it, and my brain actually said, why take the chance? Yeah, my wife was kind of pissed when I showed up in a cab, but kind of not at the same time. When I explained to her what had happened, she didn't know whether to be pissed that I drank too much or happy that I acted responsibly. And with that, Brad froze. I looked at him, and he was busy processing. And then he repeated it again. I acted responsibly. It's kind of nice to say those words. Heck yeah, I said. 10, not 30. Clear thinking enough to use the breathalyzer and determine that .10 was too much of a risk. Calling a cab? Heck yeah. Not a home run, but a good, solid stand-up double for sure. Brad then went on to tell me that he ran into one of his buddies on Sunday at church. His buddy looked like hell. His buddy had gone home and continued to drink even more at home. Brad, on the other hand, felt like $1,000,000. His buddy had no clue that Brad had drank less than 1/3 of what he had. Brad looked at me and repeated, a good solid double. I guess I never looked at it that way.